at Brookings. You are joining us for a conversation about artificial intelligence education in context of crisis. This is the second in a series of discussions we have been having this month related to AI. Last week, we talked about AI and children's socialization in relation to their development and learning. And this week, we're talking about a different part of the world. There is almost 250 million young people who don't have access to education because of crisis, whether it's conflict or extreme impacts from climate change. That number has increased over the last 3 years by 35 million kids. So this is a large segment of the world's population. And I have to say, in preparing for this event, I am considerably more hopeful about the role of AI in really making an important difference in these contexts compared to our discussion last week, in which I came away really thinking we need to contain AI and be very careful, particularly in contexts where young people are getting access, have wide access to technology and it's readily available. Not so in these contexts. So I am really pleased to be joined by 3 experts. I'm going to introduce them. We are going to all have a discussion together, and then we will leave time for questions. There are hundreds of people, almost 1,000, I think, who have signed up and sent questions in, but please also send your own questions in, hashtag AI in Education on X, or through the Q&A function, and we will take as many as we can. So joining me today is Mati Amin. We're very happy to have Mati. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of Solex, which is a WhatsApp-based online academy accessing synchronous learning, especially for girls in Afghanistan who no longer have access to secondary education. Welcome, Mati. We also have Krista Belen Rivas Gutierrez, who is a UNHCR youth representative, UN High Commissioner for Refugees. She is a refugee herself, and she is a global leader in the Tertiary Refugee Student Network, which helps refugee students access education, skills, and jobs. Krista, thank you for being with us. And lastly, we have Jamie Alexandre, who is the co-founder and co-executive director of Learning Equality, a nonprofit who works to give access to education to children in some of the most marginalized and remote areas of the world. So thank you 3 for joining us. And Mati, let's start with you. You have been deeply involved, particularly around girls' education in Afghanistan. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and what you've been up to and what SOLA is before we get to Solex?
Absolutely. Good morning, Rebecca. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Brookings Institute for organizing this important discussion. To your question, SOLA, which stands for School of Leadership Afghanistan, I started in 2008 as a scholarship program to help bring young Afghan girls to the U.S., primarily to the U.S. for education, high school, college education. We did that for several years until 2016, when we realized that instead of bringing Afghan girls to access education outside the country, why don't we bring quality education to them inside the country? And so in 2016, we opened SOLA School, the first and only all-girls boarding school in Afghanistan, located in Kabul. And it was a school from 6th grade to 12th grade, and operated from 2016 to 2001, August of 2001, as a boarding school. And we had students from 28 of the 34 provinces by 2021. We were towards the end in the process of constructing our own campus in Afghanistan. And in August of 2021, we unfortunately had to leave the country. So we brought our students, staff, faculty, and their families. We left Afghanistan and relocated to Rwanda, where we have been operating as a boarding school since then. We have continuously admitted students. Our student body has grown over the years since we evacuated, and it's been an incredible journey for our students to be pursuing education away from families. These are young students, sixth grade to 12th grade. And so, but they are fighters. They want to continue their education. And if they have to leave their families and their country to do so, they're doing that. And we are continuing in Rwanda.
Thank you. Yeah, I have followed, as you know, the work of SOLA. It's incredibly inspiring and impressive. Um, and the girls are definitely going to sort of lead the world in some way or another at some point when they get an opportunity. But tell me now, why did you found SOLA X, and what is SOLA X?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. When we left Afghanistan as a school, we wanted to, of course, take our students, the students we had in Kabul with us, to Rwanda so that they could continue their education and move forward. But we also decided that we were going to continue our operations as a school and bring in new students, which we have done since then. But as an organization, we felt a responsibility to do more. In a physical space, you can only accommodate so many learners, so many students. And so when the Taliban came into power, soon after that, they said education for Afghan girls beyond sixth grade is not allowed, it's not permitted. And so as an organization, we felt a responsibility to do a lot more. How can we take the SOLA education and bring it to girls in Afghanistan in the most remote parts of the country? And so SOLA X came from that sense of responsibility. And in the process, we looked at two things: the political reality, again, girls not being able to go to school, and the technological reality on the ground, where girls don't have access to internet, they don't have expensive gadgets. In most cases, they don't even have emails. And so we looked at how can we build a product where it can reach the most remote parts of the country, in villages in Helmand, in Kandahar, in Jalalabad, and Mazar-e Sharif. And so we leveraged existing technology that Afghan families, those who have even basic smartphone, use, and it's WhatsApp. Family use it for communication. And so if an Afghan family has a smartphone and they open it up, it's quite likely that that's the first step they go into. And so they use it with ease. And so we have turned a WhatsApp into an online academy where Afghan girls can come in, enroll, and then request learning modules from SOLA X. And we have developed digital curriculum that we deliver through our WhatsApp Academy.
And tell us how you used AI, because you were telling me how that has been actually very helpful in creating the content.
Absolutely. Again, when a young Afghan girl in Helmand saves one of our service numbers, and we provide multiple because we also understand that a family might have more than one girl who is not able to continue her education. And so we provide multiple service numbers. They save it as a Solex Online Academy in their contacts. They enroll, and when they enroll, they are able to see all the course catalog. And so what we did, we launched about a year ago in March of 2024. We launched with the ESL curriculum, sort of from a novice low to intermediate high,
So
and the
learning English.
for English as a
Yes.
second language,
Yeah.
yes. And the earlier levels of that ESL curriculum is taught in Pashto and Dari. And so when a girl enrolls, of course, they're able to enroll in any of the different levels. And the way we approached this problem was digitization of curriculum to be delivered through WhatsApp is a tricky one, right? You have to turn them into these small learning modules. In our case, we do a 30-minute lesson. And so we have leveraged AI for initial drafting. So
Mhm.
again, we have instructional designers, SME subject matter experts who create the initial scope and sequence, and then we leverage AI to do the initial drafting of the lessons, of the text. We then put SMEs on it for review, so there are humans in the loop to make sure that whatever the AI is generating is actually um,
Good.
good and effective. And so we have used AI, leveraged it both for the initial drafting of the text, but also later on leveraged it to create digital assets.
Okay.
Especially for Afghan learners, there is not enough images or digital assets on Shutterstock, for example. You can go on, but then you can leverage AI to create custom digital assets.
And so you're talking about photos, illustrations, pictures, graphs to go along with the lesson. So it's not just text-based. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. So what we do is our lessons are, um, again, a 30-minute lesson has a PDF, it would have infographics, it would have a podcast, it would have
Mm.
animations, images, etc. Because that's how young learners learn. If you were to just give them plain text, um, um, you have to then worry
Tough.
about the engagement. And so it's really, really important that we did that.
And you have ESL and girls are going through it, but it's really the AI is really helping you generate this entire sort of educational program. So you have English as a second language. What else is available? Or what are you
We
working on next?
Absolutely. So we also work really closely with National Geographic to develop courses around storytelling or the impact
Mm.
of storytelling. And those courses are offered in English, Pashto, and Dari. We then moved on. So when we completed the ESL program, we looked at digitizing the Afghan curriculum. So we have taken the Afghan curriculum, seventh grade to 12th
So
grade.
yeah, middle yeah, junior secondary, senior secondary, middle school, high school for Americans. Okay. That they're not getting, they can't, they're not allowed.
The reason why we went from seventh grade up to 12th grade is because those girls are actually not allowed to go to school. And so we taken the Afghan curriculum that's really focused on the existing curriculum is focused on rote memorization. So we have taken that, the scope and sequence, and then leveraged AI to do again the initial drafting, to make sure whatever we create is aligned with the scope and sequence, and then have created text, images, and all these different assets. We launched with the seventh grade curriculum earlier this year. We are now working on developing and digitizing eighth grade to 12th grade, and we are hoping that in the next 12 months we'll be able to deploy all of that. That's over 100 courses. Um, and then ultimately, I mean, you look at um, we use AI to create content, but is there a place for AI to be able to interact with the learner?
Mm.
And that's what we want to explore down the road. Interact with the learner in Pashto and in Dari,
Mm.
but putting guardrails that when that interaction is happening, it's specific to the content that's delivered, right? And so we are trying to figure that out. I'm sure it's possible, but we had to take this first step of
Yeah.
digitizing the curriculum to deliver to the learners.
One of the things I wanted to ask you before I move to Krista is, when you were talking about these 30-minute modules, and they have really interesting pictures, and they have podcasts, and they have little videos, and it's young people can access the content, multiple ways by listening, by watching, by hearing, by reading. And I kept thinking, I wonder if there is a better educational experience, at least sort of cognitively and for engagement, than sitting in a school. Nothing can replace being a student, going to school, getting out of the house. There's this is definitely a Band-Aid, learning on a phone, one family, probably there's one phone for one family, multiple kids, like it's not ideal, but it seems more engaging than the schools I've visited. Do you think it might be?
Well, again, I think to your point, online learning can never mean, in my view, can't really replace in-person learning. And so when we launched Solex, we were very clear that it's not a replacement for in-classroom learning, right? Now, you can look at the in-classroom learning that happened in Afghanistan versus Solex, and I could probably say that at least the learning material we deliver is not probably, is far superior to what was normally taught to seventh graders in Afghanistan, to girls in Afghanistan. So I think in that regard, I would say, in-person learning is, of course, ideal. The hope is that when Afghan girls are someday able to go back to school, that Solex doesn't go away, that it can be used as a supplementary product, that it can be used for learners to catch up, right? And so I think that's what we are trying to do. And one of the things we did was, again, looking at that, technological reality on the ground. Most of our girls, the girls who use Solex, don't own their own cell phone. They don't have their own smartphone, and so they're either borrowing from a father or an elder brother. And so when we designed Solex, we made sure that it's self-paced, that we don't auto-trigger lessons to send out, because they were most likely that those learners will miss them. And so we say, come in, enroll, create your account, enroll in a course, and request a 30-minute lesson whenever you're ready. So they can request one today, and then a month later, come back in and request the second one.
Right, right. Well, I love that idea of sort of doing all we can to help young people now, but also setting up a future
Yep.
a future resource for a future time and being ready
Yep.
to help a bunch of girls when the moment arises and things shift. Thank you. Thank you, Mati. Krista, I'd like to move to you now. Can you tell us a little bit, about your background? You yourself have experience living as a refugee in Latin America, and you fled your home country of Nicaragua for Mexico recently, and then got engaged in the network. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Sure. First, thank you all for assisting here, and thank you, Rebecca, and everyone for opening this important conversation. Well, I left my country in 2020 and I moved to Mexico because I wanted to keep studying. I wanted to access to higher education. And I decided that I wanted to move to Mexico because it was one of the cheapest options. That's why I moved here. But it took me around 2 years to be able to access to university because first I had to know how to move around here, what I needed to study, because the system, even though we are from Latin America, the system is completely different. And then I have to prepare to access to university because here, if you want to access to a public university, you need to ace an exam. And for example, for the university where I am studying in right now, they only have approximately the 5% of acceptance rate, depending on the test. So it was a little bit hard for me to access to it because I had to study to get to the level that Mexicans had to access to university. So once I finally entered to university, I noticed, of course, I experienced some of the obstacles that refugees have. And that's why I joined Tertiary Refugee Student Network, because I wanted to support the work that they were doing.
Great. So tell us about the network, tell us about what it does. And, one of the things that I think is really interesting is, Mati and his SOLA X team is using AI behind the scenes to generate content and really high quality as best you get content. And you guys are actually using AI directly with students, in addition to, other things behind the scenes. So tell us about the network and tell us how you're using AI to help young people.
Sure. Well, TRSN is a global youth-led network. We are working globally, locally, and regionally. And TRSN was created to respond the needs of refugee students. We aim to connect, empower, and support forcibly displaced youth pursuing higher education while uniting them as a community. We try to connect everyone so they can also help each other depending on their experiences. So with this idea, we decided to start our work with refugee communities, seeing how accessing information and accessing education and language training are persistent challenges, especially when you are navigating a unfamiliar system, which is really hard. And speaking of this, going back to Mexico, for example, we noticed that refugee youth don't have a support system that guides them through the process of accessing higher education. Once you access to university, there are a few scholarships and organizations like UNHCR that helps you, but before that, you are all by yourself to know how to access education. So these root causes like lack of information, lack of preparation for public universities, and you might ask why not private universities? Well, here they are really expensive, so I think accessing public universities is a better option. That's why we started this using AI mostly as a supportive tool to bridge these gaps with refugees. First, for example, we use it with accessing higher education. Um, we use AI like ChatGPT to give an example because it's really easy to learn how to use it. You can download the app and it's just like chatting with someone on WhatsApp. So that's why we decided to use this AI and other ones to help them to understand how the applications processes works. So, for example, if we receive a refugee that does not speak Spanish, they can use this AI to understand are they asking, what they need, what information they need to continue. We also, keeping with that example, we are using this AI to help them as a support tool to learn Spanish because navigating in a foreign country and not speaking the mother tongue is really hard. That's why we are also using these AIs. And we are also using it as a study guide. Let's say, for example, we need to learn history of Mexico and geography of Mexico and advanced math, which were the obstacles that were hard for me, for example. So besides the downloadable guide that we have, we teach them how to use AI to, for example, create their own guide questions to study, or maybe if they didn't understood something from the guides or from the books, they can directly ask to AI how this works in a conversational way.
Great. And one of the things I'm curious for you to talk about is, you have said to me one of the things you wish is that people had a positive view of AI because there's a general sort of you said you felt there was a general view that AI is a little bit dangerous or not great or worrisome, and that you are actually finding it incredibly helpful and unlocking opportunities for refugee youth in Mexico. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that perception that you feel and what's next for the network, for the work.
Sure. Well, AI is not necessarily good or bad because AI is a tool. What matters is how we use it, because of course there will be people that want to use it in a bad way, but in here we are seeing examples that AI is being used to support refugees that want to build again their lives. So for example, in refugee and crisis affected contexts, AI can even help to break barriers and expand the access to education, which is what we are seeing right now. AI is helping us a lot to develop a new way to study. and develop a new way to understand how to navigate a new country where you are all by yourself, understanding how everything works. So I think we need to change that idea that a tool is good or bad because
Mm,
it's going to depend of how we are going to use it.
great. Thank you. Did you want to say anything about what you're sort of looking forward to for the network, some of the programming you're thinking about for the future?
Sure. Well, we want to keep using AI because it helps us to build, for example, future study guides, and we want to use it to continue with that, of course, with the help of humans, keep humans working. But we are seeing forward to creating a new system to guide refugee students on how to access higher education. Even in 10 or 20 or 30 years, they'll be able to understand how everything works, even though we are not here anymore or TRSN doesn't stop existing, for example.
Great. Thank you so much, Krista, and thank you for your work. Jamie, you are next. So we're sort of moving from, AI being used for back office, behind the scenes content development to now being used with individual refugee students through the network, and learning equality is using AI and really big sort of systemic transformation initiatives. So before we get into that, for people who don't know, Jamie, you were at the ground floor of learning equality. You joined in 2012, right before it was officially started in 2013. And I do remember those days and talking to Mike Smith about getting Khan Academy Light into places that need it. So can you talk a little bit about your journey and the evolution of learning equality, where it came from and where you are now?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. And Krista, Matti, so inspiring to hear your work. I'm honored to be on this call with you today. Yeah, so I was doing my PhD in cognitive science, really studying how people learn and looking at basic learning sciences, but really wanted to have a deeper impact and think about how we could translate that into applied education technology. There's also this time where there was this big boom in education technology, a lot of excitement around the potential, leveling the playing field. I had an opportunity to spend the summer of 2012 interning at Khan Academy. And it was during this moment where this vision of everyone everywhere being able to access high quality education through open content, through distribution online, free access, could actually level the playing field, turn the tides, and help to build a more equitable ecosystem. But then realizing at the same time while I was there, two-thirds of the world still didn't have access to the internet. As Matti mentioned, that's a huge barrier for huge swaths of the human population, and especially for those who are most marginalized and face the biggest barriers to education overall. And so if we actually wanted these technologies to level the playing field, we needed to actively build bridges and find ways to get it into the hands and support effective use for communities that were otherwise being left out. So that was where some of that initial idea came from. So KA Light, the Khan Academy Light, was this spin-off from that internship that we created as an open source project and announced online, and it just kind of took off like wildfire because it met this strong need and demand for quality content that could be open, freely distributed, but being able to use that on low-cost devices and open, free distribution, sneaker net distribution type ways, sharing from person to person. So within, we announced this open source project, announced it online. Within 6 months, it was in 60 countries, and it just kind of spread like wildfire from there. And that's when we started learning equality for this vision of creating a more equitable, inclusive edtech ecosystem that allowed communities to also contribute their own knowledge and share that back, as well as participate and learn and benefit from these new innovations.
And tell us, so fast forward to today, how many countries are you in? What are you offering? Because your scope is very, very large.
Yeah, so we've now reached over 10 million learners in 220 countries and territories around the world. Most of that through this do-it-yourself grassroots adoption model where anybody can take it and run with it. And we see great examples of that, but also through strategic partnerships. Just such a diverse context of use as well. Some of the first use cases were here in the US within a couple of weeks of launching it in prison contexts. Refugee contexts were a huge adoption area early on, rural schools, libraries, community centers, individuals in homes. So just very diverse use cases. one of the use cases that we really honed in on in this collaboration with UNHCR for many years now is supporting displaced and refugee populations because of all the barriers faced both in education and connectivity and other types of support structures. So
I want to ask you about,
Yeah.
if you could give us an example of maybe, something you've done in refugee contexts with UNHCR or other partners.
Yeah.
But before I get there, remind me again how many, you have a vast quantity of open educational resources.
Yeah, so K-Lite was this first platform. Calibri is the platform that was built out of all the lessons from the early years of deploying that. So it's a library of content drawn from dozens of different open educational resource sources, local community created content, all organized into a central repository of over 200,000 open educational resources.
200,000, that was my memory.
And so, of course,
the
one of the challenges with all that content, and this is where some of the AI stuff comes in as well, is organizing and aligning that and finding the most relevant pieces to match to curricular standards. And that was something that came out a lot with our refugee work as well, is how do we make sure that teachers have limited time, limited access to internet, limited resources in the learning and teaching environments. So thinking about how we could really leverage these technologies to amplify and make that content more discoverable.
Right.
So
give us an example, because it is laborious. You have 200,000 materials, sets of materials, and then you've got, how do you get it used and into a system and aligned? So give us an example from a refugee context.
So I think that the journey with UNHCR on this work started in 2018. We did a co-design session with Kakuma refugee camp teachers in Kenya, really understanding needs, goals, challenges, and thinking through how we could work together to address some of them. We visited one school, in terms of limited materials, we visited one school where there was a single textbook being passed around from student to student. So the teacher was going and showing a picture to each student one at a time. And when you just think about the time that's taken for that and just how much missed opportunity there is. So that was where a lot of this strong need for curriculum alignment took place. We did a lot of manual curriculum alignment using curricular experts, or not using them, in collaboration with curriculum experts, which led both to this deeper understanding of the process and the pain points, but also this amazing data set. And so that data set across many different languages, different curricula around the world.
And is this teacher training curricula you're talking about in
This is student and teacher facing, so primarily student facing content. So things like Khan Academy, but also many global OER sources like that. So for self-paced learning, for formative assessment, for also teacher guides and lesson plans to support teachers. So all integrated into a single blended learning platform to use in the learning environment by both the teachers and the students. So with that data set, though, now we have all of this, correspondences between this global OER repository and individual learning objectives from curricular standards around the world. We use that through a Kaggle machine learning competition to train up a recommender model that allowed us to recommend specific pieces of content to specific places in the curricular standards. And in the years since, the generative AI has really unlocked the potential of different parts of this workflow, especially on the digitization side, similar to what Maddie's talking about, how you can now take large sets of content, extract content, restructure it, digitize it into formal structures. That's been a huge time saver for the work. So what we end up with is that we can take a picture of a page of a textbook or pass in a full PDF of the curriculum documents, extract the taxonomy of learning objectives, and then automatically match content into there. And then, like Matty and Krista both emphasized, human in the loop and humans at the center of that review process and having that expertise in there. But rather than spending 12 months doing that manual process and searching and finding and structuring and retyping, copy pasting, reformatting, that can be done in a matter of weeks now. So it's just a huge time saver and unlocks the potential.
I mean, it really is breakthrough, honestly, for contexts where there isn't high quality teaching learning materials available. What's next for learning equality? What are some things on the horizon for you?
Yeah, on the AI front in particular, with the theme of today's call, one piece is directly getting AI, like we were talking about here, into the hands of teachers and learners, but in a way that is both guided by effective principles and with the guardrails in place, but for our use cases in particular, thinking about offline. So that's taking these, instead of these large language models, some of these smaller language models, and really optimizing, fine-tuning, testing them on a wide variety of hardware, and optimizing them for effective offline use cases. And that's not just about the direct benefits of the way it might support learning in the environment, but also about building these fundamental AI literacies and competencies, which, like Krista was emphasizing as well, it's such a valuable skill for supporting ongoing pathways in education and workforce. And if we want to avoid further leaving populations behind, we need to get hands-on project-based practice with some of these tools. So that's one of our core areas of work right now. Another similar to what Maddie is describing is generating contextually appropriate student-centered lesson plans to support teachers in South Sudan. This is a collaboration with UNHCR and Vodafone Foundation. And we're also preparing to embark on a project to support coaches who are providing professional development to teachers with doing that in a more scalable way through WhatsApp channels with kind of a co-pilot model where the AI chatbot can support reflective practice and debriefs after a teaching session, and then summarize that and synthesize that to pass back to the coach so that they can kind of understand where teachers are facing challenges.
Oh, interesting. Can you tell me about the offline version that you're going for? When do you think this might show up in reality, and what would it look like if I'm a teacher in a refugee camp or a student? How would it be?
Yeah, so one of the there's the technical challenges and then the human pedagogical challenges. On the technical challenges, running on low-cost edge devices that are not connected to the internet means running some of these smaller models. The smaller models means both you can't get so many tokens, so many words generated per minute in parallel. So we have to be careful about the use cases from just a feasibility perspective as well.
Yeah.
So the targeted use case we're looking at initially is kind of question answering rather than full long dialogues. So a student being able to formulate a question that's something they're curious about, or a teacher in natural language, and have it used RAG methods to search through we have this great offline content that's been aligned to the local standards, that's been organized and filtered down. So being able to draw the relevant pieces from that and feed that into the context to help provide an answer, and then direct them to resources within the platform. That's one of the key ways, as well as drafting assessments with teacher review to support more formative assessment.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you three. We're going to open it up to questions. There's a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to start. There's two, let's see. There's so many questions. Okay. I want to follow up on a question from Samrita, who is an academic at ISDM in India, around this topic of curriculum that you have all been talking about, and you most recently, Jamie, which is what's the sort of lessons learned, best practices, guiding principles around curating curriculum and content in refugee contexts for young people who are not in their home country. I did lots of work on this. It seems like a million years ago, on this idea of a curriculum that faces both ways, both for the host country and then also that they could return. I'd love to hear from you, though. I haven't done this work in a long time. What do you all think? What are some of the best practices on sort of content creation for refugee contexts? Who wants to dive in?
Yeah, I'm happy to. That's a great question. In our case, I'll be specific to the SOLA, Solex model. And in our case, I think what we have done is we have realized, we know our end learner. They're Afghan girls living in Afghanistan. And so what we have done is we have gone to the Afghan curriculum, taken that, and that's based on, as I said earlier, rote memorization, but injecting that critical thinking component into it. But it's Afghan curriculum centered around Afghan girl. So the way
but they're not refugees, right?
That's what exactly.
They're just girls who are oppressed and denied their human right to go to school.
Exactly. So in our case, we have done it for Afghan girls. So we couldn't have taken a Western curriculum and put it out for Afghan girls. So in our case, it's very clear we've got to go with the Afghan curriculum.
But what do you do for SOLA? the girls physically in SOLA in Rwanda, Afghan girls, is it an Afghan curriculum? Is it a mix of Rwandan, Afghan in case girls go back, but also what if they stay in Rwanda? Like how, or how do
That's
you?
a great, yeah. So it's a mix there. And I think the courses that we continue, that we really want to make sure that our girls are still engaging with is, Dari, Pashto, Islamic studies, Quran studies, Afghan history. So those are the courses, and then we bring in the English, the math, the chemistry, the bio. So there it's a mix on campus. But for the girls in Afghanistan, Solex is the
Yeah,
Afghan.
of course. Yeah. So are girls learning in SOLA, are they learning about Rwanda and the country they're
Yeah,
in?
absolutely, absolutely. But we also want to make sure that they are learning their own languages.
Yeah,
Pashto,
it
Dari,
seems like maintain the core, the culture, the language, the history, any sort of cultural, as you say, essential Quranic studies, essential sort of components.
Absolutely. And again, as an organization, and as a school, we stick to our mission and vision. Our girls are the future leaders of
Right,
Afghanistan. And so when they go back, when the day comes, when they return,
right,
they have to be able to communicate
right.
in their local languages and understand the Afghan history and all of that. So
So
it's,
that I think is a very unique, you guys have a very clear, inspiring vision of like, these are going to be the future leaders. We
yes.
don't necessarily want them to stay in Rwanda forever. It's different for folks, Krista and Jamie. Krista, you might not, you said you had to flee because the government was persecuting you. You might not go back home to Nicaragua. I'm not sure what you're thinking or your plans. Like, how do you think about what you need in a curriculum as a student? And then Jamie, I'd be curious how you think about this because the context you work is so different around the world.
Sure. Well, we are always thinking about the possibility of going back and, of course, contributing to our home countries. But in case this is not possible, we want to help them to adapt to the country that received them, to their new communities. So we have these two visions about building a new life again in the new country and feeling happy that they were able to, but also keeping in mind about the possibility of going back, but feeling prepared to contribute to
Mm,
rebuilding their home country.
mm. Love it. Jamie, what would you say to this question? How do you think about it?
Yeah, for us, when it comes to selection of content, it's really about putting agency at the center. So we never want to be the ones to say, this is what you should be using. It's about creating the tools that make it easy at different parts of the chain, because we also have to recognize the constraints. A teacher doesn't have time to sift through hundreds of thousands of resources to find the relevant pieces. So there is stuff that happens upstream, but it's having that be driven by the lived experience, the local curricular expertise, and so forth to make sure that that's feeding in. So that's kind of our overall answer to that question. But I think for refugee context in particular, things we've seen and things that have been incorporated into the programs that we work on are the importance of social emotional learning, especially with younger learners. So we've developed a holistic program in collaboration with partners in Uganda for social emotional learning and foundational skills because of all the trauma and displacement, and also dealing with mixed levels of students who some are overage learners because they dropped out, had disruptions to their learning. The pandemic threw another wrench into that. So I think just recognizing the social emotional realities and making sure that that's part of a holistic program. Also, as was talked about here, the varied mother tongues is a critical piece. And so sometimes there's regulations in the host country around language of instruction and language of content that's being used. And so finding creative ways to kind of feed in mother tongue language materials alongside the formal curriculum materials, and making sure the teachers who are themselves refugees are able to translate and use mother tongue to build that bridge is really important. But also being able to have materials that support even, for that program, it was targeting P3, primary 3 learners, but some of them were way more advanced than others. You have very, very levels, and making sure that the materials support that differentiation, remedial, as well as exploratory content is critical as well.
Great. I have a question from two doctoral students. They had a similar question. One didn't give their name, but the other is Farah from ASU, around sort of what are the particular considerations we need to have around education data and privacy and, challenges in collecting and managing it data in, crisis contexts. What do we have to be particularly careful about? Who wants to jump in and take that?
I'm happy to go again. And again, in our context is so specific.
Yeah,
right?
which is why we want you here.
Yeah. So SOLA-X and I think that's an important question. And to our learners when they enroll in SOLA-X through WhatsApp is encrypted, and we don't ask for a ton of information, just like you would register for any online account, name, etc. And what we do is the info that comes into our database is doubly encrypted. So our database, the servers there are encrypted, the WhatsApp is encrypted. One of the questions that I often get is, if girls' education in Afghanistan is illegal, can girls still study on WhatsApp? So we look at that and say, well, if girls are studying on WhatsApp from their homes, the Taliban haven't publicly come out and said that's illegal. And so they can do that. But even if they were they were asked to show their phone and somebody was look through their chat history, they could actually easily delete their chat history with SOLA-X, delete the entire account, come back and resume where they left off. So we have built-in mechanism to be able for learners to retrieve their old account. And so we have taken privacy and security actually quite seriously, in that we don't ask for a ton of information. We double encrypt our database, and we allow for learners to be able to very quickly delete their chat history with Solex.
Great, thanks. There's many questions. Jamie, did you want to?
I was just going to echo the importance of, just collecting as little personally identifiable information as possible from a targeting and risk perspective for every student, but especially in this context. So that's our core strategy as well. It's just only gather the things that are necessary and make sure that there's agency around where that data is synced to and who has access to it.
Great, thanks. There is a question around, it's a technological question around the data that AI is trained on. And, so many of the big models are trained on English or some of the, the highly digitized, highly prevalent languages in the world, French, Mandarin, whatever. And a lot of the languages that we're talking about in conflict context, particularly refugee context, don't have a large corpus of digitized language. So how are we training data on that? Jamie, you talked about that a little bit with your offline versions, just pulling from curriculum, but how are we thinking about that?
I think first, just recognizing that, as you say, the models don't perform as well. It's generally, there's some data in there. They can function within quite a wide variety of languages. There are a lot of efforts to train some of the foundational models on as many languages as possible, but there just isn't the data to train them to the level of performance that we see for the larger, more represented languages. So a big part of our work, us as organizations, is building those data sets, gathering that data, finding ways to anonymize it, share it out so that it can be used for training both the foundation models and for other organizations to be fine-tuning and adapting their work. But I think another way of addressing that is similar to what Maddie is describing in the way they're approaching their work, drawing from the curriculum in generating the new content. I like to think of it less as fully generative AI and really more transformative AI, where the more inputs you can give it and scaffolding and reg and context, the less work it has to do and the less it's just going to kind of pull out of its own memory or weight space, and it can just draw on those existing pieces and recombine them and restructure them and use them to inform what it's creating to create better fidelity. So I think that's one of the key approaches in the short term, is just seeding in the right context at the right moment. But longer term, we need to collectively as a community just continue aggregating, sharing, documenting those data sets so that they can train better models.
Great. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Mati.
Yeah, so like what Jamie said, I think in our case, we feed it the scope and sequence that is developed by experts, the SMEs and instructional designers. And on the other side, the input is the actual curriculum that's translated.
Right.
And so it generates these scripts and lessons and storyboards and all of that. But every time we do it, it gets better because then we feed it what we think is the right one. So with each attempt, it's getting better, it's getting fine-tuned. But the source material are, that's coming from our instructional designers and SMEs.
Great. There's another question, and Krista, I'd like you to start, but I'd like everybody to weigh in that builds off of your comment, Jamie, at the end, which was, your learning equality, one of the things on your horizon is thinking about offline AI, where you can, in your own words, have maybe a Q&A session. And you said it's not just for access, it's for making sure young people know about AI and can use it and are familiar with it. So this is a question around AI literacy, and the idea of getting familiar with AI and how to use it. How much, none of your programs are AI literacy programs, but I wonder if they're actually also helping people become AI literate as they learn Spanish or learn, Mexican history or whatever it is. Krista, what would you say to that?
Sure. Well, to use AI, you need to know how to use it. So first we teach to the students on how to use it, maybe how to write a prompt and what kind of information you shouldn't share to be safe, of course. So that's how we manage these kind of things. We try to teach them at least the basic info that they should know to be able to use correctly AI to study and of course to protect themselves.
Great. And do you feel students are, how fluidly are students using it? Do you feel that they really have a good grasp of what they can do with AI, and are they going on and using it in other ways? Do you start seeing that?
Yeah, I've seen more open mind on the youth of using AI. They actually feel like it's a good tool because they can get feedback more personalized, different from courses you need to read or see or listen to something and see if you understood. With AI, they are able to ask direct questions and get the feedback to understand or learn something that it's hard for them. So we are seeing that they are even starting using it to understand topics on their degrees even.
Great. Jamie or Mati, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, just further echoing that. I think another aspect, so there's the learning about risks of sharing data that Krista emphasized is really important. I think another aspect of it is understanding kind of how to recognize misinformation or how to double check sources. So there's a lot of overlap with media literacy, critical thinking skills, and a lot of these traditional 21st century skills that come into play here. And it's just kind of accelerated, especially by the fact when we're looking at offline AI models, there's a higher risk of hallucinations in some of these smaller models that don't have all of the safeguards and extra training and haven't memorized as much because they're smaller. So they're more likely to make things up. So I think, yeah, just having that be leverage the fact that it does hallucinate even more than an online model, potentially. We're going to put safeguards in. Using that as an opportunity to build up the skills around recognizing those risks.
Great. Mati, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for young people, it's important to, echoing Jamie and Krista's point, knowing that these models hallucinate, and so some of the info might not be correct. But in our case, what we would love to do is to embed AI within the WhatsApp chatbot, fine-tune it, put guardrails so that when a student finishes a lesson, is able to then engage with that AI and say, well, great lesson, but I didn't understand this particular piece. Can you help me understand it better? And the AI helper really confined to that particular topic and saying, let me help you, and doesn't go out of that scope, is what we would love to explore. And I think it's absolutely possible to do that.
There's a question from John in Canada who just says, he's familiar with Khan Academy. How is what you guys are doing different? I don't know if he called out you, Mati, in particular. Do you want to just, I think it's,
Sure, it's a great question, and when we were looking initially before we launched Solex, looking at what are some of the products out there, what are some of the initiatives, what are some of the things people are doing, and of course we knew about Khan Academy and its use, but the reality on the ground in Afghanistan is that it requires internet bandwidth where you can watch a 20 or 30-minute video, and most learners don't have that capacity. So that's one. Second is, I know some of the content, the Khan Academy content is translated into Pashto and Dari, but not all of it. That's another challenge. And then for our learners who are young learners, they need learning pathways. You can't put them in a digital library and say, go figure. You have to give them, here's the starting point, and these are the steps. And so when we say it's enrolled in a self-paced course, we start them from lesson one and move them all the way up. And so with all these, I think I'm not suggesting that Khan Academy doesn't work, but in certain contexts, in the context of Afghanistan, the SOLA X model is a lot more effective because it can reach girls in the most remote parts of the country. And then again, one thing with Khan Academy, a really basic one is you have to create an account, I imagine, right? So to enroll, and that requires an email. A 13-year-old girl in Kandahar is not going to use email to sign up for an online platform, a browser-based platform. And so Khan Academy is great, but in the context of Afghanistan, I think Solex works much better.
thank you. I have another question that's come in, and Jamie, I want to direct it towards you. It's around infrastructure, AI infrastructure, and talking about, the fact that infrastructure in conflict contexts and contexts of crisis is so often targeted. Generally, education infrastructure, schools are bombed, Um, how do we, does AI infrastructure, is it at an advantage? Because it might be somewhat distributed, or are there big risks to the infrastructure not being there in crisis context? How should we think about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's just the fundamental reality that the infrastructure isn't always great to start with, and so we can't rely on it for ongoing, like when we think about even if when there's occasional connectivity through cell phones and so forth, thinking about a class period, you have 45 minutes, you have a lesson to complete, you've designed some activities around some education technology solution. Middle of the class period, the internet goes out, everything drops. Teacher has to scramble and figure out new activities, and the learning is disrupted. So that's one of the reasons that even in semi-online contexts, our platform Calibri is used very broadly, because it doesn't rely on that. Everything is running from a local server directly in the classroom. If the internet drops out completely, if there's no internet to start with, it can still be used robustly. And so by virtue of the fact that it was designed as offline first, it's robust to those types of disruptions. You can, stick a USB key in and choose what you want to export. It spits it out onto the USB key. You plug it into another installation of Calibri. It pulls that in all seamlessly through the UI. So that sort of workflow can happen even when there is no physical distributed network. You can use the human networks for intermittent syncing, updates, and sharing. So it doesn't rely on that infrastructure. But yeah, it's a huge reality that infrastructure, if it is there to start with, is often disrupted, and we need to plan around that.
So basically design for offline first,
Yeah.
and then ladder up. It's really good advice. Krista, there's another question about sort of your hope for refugee students. Final last word before I close. What is your sort of hope for what refugee students can be able to access with AI?
I hope that they'll be able to feel more prepared for the future and they feel more prepared to reach their dreams, even though they suffer and went through certain difficulties. I hope that they feel that they have the tools to rebuild their lives.
Thank you. Well, that is a wonderful note to end on. A huge thanks to Krista, to Mati, to Jamie, for your time today, for all the work that you each are doing in your respective parts of the world. And I have to say, I'm leaving this conversation very excited about the possibility of AI and really unlocking education for so many millions of kids who don't have access to it. And I just, the more I dive into this with our work on the AI task force and our pre-mortem on AI in education, I keep thinking that AI in education is the story of two different worlds. There's the world where the technology is omnipresent, that young people are getting access and flooded by things. This is places in the world where there's broadband and multiple devices and all sorts of, sort of AI tools that are probably not even designed and appropriate for young people to be engaging with. And then there's the second world, which is the world we've talked about today, which is where young people aren't on the internet. They don't have a device. Many communities are separated. And I just think that world, there's such promise. And the work you're doing is really important, not only for accessing education, but trying to close this a digital divide in some way, shape, or form, or AI literacy divide. So thank you all for your work and for your time, and thank everybody for listening. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are based. Thank you very much. Okay.